What a weekend. Welcome into Daily Faceoff Live, streaming live on the Daily Faceoff YouTube and brought to you by Bet365. Download the app today and use the promo code NATION. Whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. And Frank, I will be totally honest with you. This is some of the most excited I have been to do a show with you because you had the news on Friday night that totally shocked the hockey world.
That was a wild one. I mean, look, you could be in this game for a long time and not see a trade like that happen. Just the sheer magnitude of player. Like we're talking, one of the top 10 players in the game, guy who's top 5 in points the last 5 years on the move on a Friday night in a 3-team trade. It's what gets your juices flowing to be in this business. I can tell you that.
Yeah, it was quite something. Mikko Rantanen is now a member of the Carolina Hurricanes. Jesse Montano is going to swing by in a little bit. We're going to talk about this more from the Avs perspective. We also have a Dominion Lending Center's poll question up now about the other piece of news, Alex Pietrangelo bowing out of the Four Nations face-off. We'll talk about that in a second. But Frank, I want to direct quickly, before we even get into the topics, your poll question that you put up on Friday night. What is the biggest NHL in-season trade in salary cap era? It is crazy to remember that Joe Thornton won the Hart Trophy the year he was moved.
Yeah, I think that to me is still the biggest one. I mean, how often does that happen? Guy has 100+ point season and wins the Hart Trophy going from one coast to the other. A healthy bit of recency bias, I think, in the results of the poll itself, because fans did pick Mikko Rantanen being on the move, but to me, it's still probably jumbo, but it's close. It's a good conversation.
Yeah, it really is. All right, let's dig into this deal, starting with the Avalanche perspective, Frank. I guess what I really do want to know is, when did the Avs realize that they needed to do this or wanted to do this? Is this something that they had been kind of sitting on for 2 or 3 months? Is this something that once the Canes came to them with this package, they went that was their realization? When did the decision turn to, we got to move on from Rantanen?
I think they had come to grips with it a few weeks ago, that they were probably leaning toward doing this. Now, the funny part about that is I first started making calls around the league about Mikko Rantanen's availability during World Junior. And I think I received some pushback at the time. Some were from some skeptical teams thinking that he just isn't going to be moved. And others were thinking that maybe that it was being used as leverage. Like, hey, if word gets out that the Avs are talking to teams about Mikko Rantanen, that will just put some pressure on the Rantanen camp to come to the table and get a deal done. And that, hey, there's no way they're actually going to do it. And I think part of the reason why there was a holdup on that was because I, for the longest time, and still would love to have been a fly on the wall, I can't imagine the conversation between Chris McFarland, the Avs GM, and Nathan McKinnon on Friday night, letting him know that we just traded the third spoke of the wheel. And that part just still shocks me. So I think there's a lot of trying to wrap your brain around that. But the other part of this is that, look, I think the Avs, they clearly drew a hard line in the sand. And I think it's a mistake to operate in absolutes. Like, I think there are exceptions to almost every rule. And when you do that, I think you put your team in a vulnerable position both ways, because you're either breaking your rule, which is not really a good look, or you end up having to say goodbye to some really important players and people. And I can't really make an argument for you that the Colorado Avalanche are better today, and I'm sure the Avs wouldn't even try. But I think you do need to reserve some judgment here for what Chris McFarland and Joe Sakic have up their sleeve over the next 5.5 weeks, which is surely to try and improve this Colorado Avalanche team. They're just, I think, a lot worse off today.
Yeah, I think there's a bunch of teams, GMs, coaches, players in the Western Conference waking up today on Monday going, yeah, not as scared of the Avs as maybe I was 72 hours ago. And I think that's a totally fair take. You talk about what else does Chris McFarland have up his sleeve. I mean, they still don't have a first rounder in the upcoming draft. They do now have 2 second rounders, but no third rounder in the upcoming draft. And I guess that's maybe a nice transition point over to the Carolina perspective of this one, Frank, because we are going to talk more Avs in a minute. Back-to-back deadlines where this Hurricanes front office goes and gets a massive fish. Like, they land a piece in Mikko Rantanen, and they don't give up one of their top 4 prospects again, and they don't give up a first-round pick again. It's incredible work.
It's crazy. To think again of the player of that magnitude moved and not trade a first round pick, like they've yet to sacrifice any part, like even 1% of their future. They've reimagined, if they're re-signing Rantanen, their cap table a bit. But think about the biggest thing that we've said about the Carolina Hurricanes over the last 5 years. Really good team that doesn't have a true game breaker, a game changer. Mikko Rantanen is that. He's, aside from, being a top 10 player in the league, he's one of the best playoff performers of his generation. He's a cup winner. He's humongous. He does everything that you'd want in terms of being a fit. And I think he's going to mesh perfectly with what Rod Brind'Amour is looking for. The play that he has on the walls, in terms of creating pressure. These are all, like, even stylistically, he's a pure fit for Carolina and what they're looking for. So I think the Canes morphed from good team in the East in what was potentially going to be a relatively down year for them into being the true Stanley Cup favorite in the Eastern Conference today.
Yep, and the betting market reflects that, actually. The Canes shooting up to the top spot or tied with the Oilers at plus 600 over, courtesy of our friends at Bet365. And I guess, listen, we mentioned there, like, what does Colorado do next? There's kind of a two-pronged thing here for what does Carolina do next, but I wanted to start with Mikko Rantanen and maybe a long-term future there in Carolina. No extension as a part of the deal, but as I fire up their Puckpedia, I go, whoa, if the cap is at $97 million, let's say it really shoots up, right? $97 million next year. They're going to have north of $40 million in cap space, Frank. And that is $40 million in cap space with, Aho signed and Svechnikov signed and Jarvis signed. Like, if they want to throw a blank check at Mikko Rantanen and say, whatever it takes, Mikko, we want you here, they are one of the teams that can do it.
And they don't do that, so don't expect them to do that. But I think they also went into this knowing, eyes wide open, a general parameter of what it was going to take, even on the high end, to sign Rantanen. That's the big difference between this year and last year trading for Jake Guentzel. Think about all the other pieces that they had to try and wedge in and re-sign. What were they going to do with Brady Shea, Brett Pesce, Teuvo Teravainen, and Stefan Nason, and then add in Guentzel on top of it? Well, now you've got everyone locked up, and you still have $20 million left over to figure it out. So I think they've got ample opportunity to keep Rantanen. But I also think that they're one team just crazy enough that if, let's just say, Rantanen is not signed before the deadline, which obviously they're going to give him some time to get his feet wet before they really take a run at him. But if it's March 1st and the deadline is the 7th and he's not re-signed, do they look at flipping him again? I don't think it's crazy out of the realm of possibility, but they've got everything on the table in front of them. They've got the cap space. They've got tons of prospects on the way that gives them real cost certainty for their cap table moving forward, that they're going to have inexpensive pieces slotting in. And they've got now another driver that they desperately needed on their team. I think Carolina, it's masterful work. You just can't get your hands on a player that good. And anytime you can, you try and bear hug him.
Yeah, and then there's the other part of it, Frank. The other prong I wanted to talk about was, what about just continuing to push all in this year? If you're the Canes, you've had a couple of years where you get to the playoffs, your goaltending's not healthy, and it sinks you. Like, if I'm Eric Tulsky, I'm sitting here going, you know what? We've gotten lucky, but it's also great work to, like, get these last two guys without giving up a first round pick. I look at that cupboard of prospects. I look at having each of your first round picks for the next 3 years. If you're Tulsky, how are you not sitting there going, let's get another one? Let's go get a goalie. Let's make sure every single hole is sewn up here and we can go on a legit run.
I just don't think that's how they think of it. I think it's all about sustainability. And I urge you today, of all days, or this weekend, whatever, to go back and listen to the Frankly Speaking episode that I did with Tom Dundon. It was in my first season doing it. This is season 3 of the show. But you listen to their owner talk, and that's how they think about it. They want 10 consecutive years of having a legitimate chance every single year to win the cup. It's not just about this year, because even in years that you have a good team and you do go all in, there's still a really good chance that you don't win. So it's about preserving those assets and the ability to continue to go after it year after year. That's their mission statement, and that's what they're trying to do.
Yeah. So while everyone was sitting here and hey, we didn't even say the name Martin Necas yet in the show, like that's another big part of it. But we'll talk about that with or in our big segment. But there's the Avs side, there's the Kane side, and then just over off to the side, it's okay, yeah, the Chicago Blackhawks were involved in this deal. Taylor Hall is on the move. He's going to Carolina. So his list of career teams gets even longer. But Frank, there was a bit of an eyebrow raise to the Chicago Blackhawks here. I almost sat and went, okay, if it was a third round pick for Taylor Hall, that would have made sense. A third round pick to keep the Rantanen money, that would have made sense. To do both and only get a third, I feel underwhelmed from a Hawks perspective.
I get it. And I think it's fair to ask the question of why didn't you get two assets? That said, Kyle Davidson addressed that this morning in his media availability in Chicago. And he said, Taylor Hall was playing in a fourth line role recently. Let's just game it out for a second, because we always think like greedy best case scenario. What happens if it's worst case scenario? What happens if you hang on to Taylor Hall, you don't do this trade, you don't get Carolina to take on all of his contract, which is a pretty big one at $6 million for his production, and you get a fourth rounder. And then it's a fourth rounder from a contending team, so it's almost a fifth. In this case scenario, they did it in a different way. They probably could have pushed and squeezed for two assets, but they got, which was essentially the best third round pick you could get, their own back. And I just think when you look at it from that point of view, it's much better to have one good asset than two crappy ones. And I think that's part of their thought process.
Yeah, and hey, you said that today on the DFO rundown too, and it did kind of hit with me and made sense. Also, new episode of the DFO rundown with Frank and Ryan S. Clark is out now. Ross Creek with an interesting one. Deal would have made more sense if it was Hall landing in Colorado with the Canes eating $2 million on him. Like, but again, that just goes to show, like, if I'm ranking it, it's the Canes are the clear winners here, and then there's a gap, and then it's Colorado and Chicago. Like, I think this is just such a runaway win for the Canes.
I couldn't agree more. And I just, that's why I'm so fascinated to see what the Avs have up their sleeve, because it's obviously something.
Also, we'll keep them going on a heater here. Kevin Lankinen to the Canes. I mean, that's what I mean. If you're the Canes, the price of getting goaltending is usually never that high. That's the one thing I'd be sitting there going, you do not want to make this move and have the season fall apart because Freddie Anderson or Kochetkov couldn't stay healthy. We're going to continue the trade conversation in 2 minutes here with our pal Jesse Montano. But first, Frank, the other news that we got over the weekend was Alex Pietrangelo dipping out of the Four Nations Faceoff. And it was kind of, funny in a way to sit here and hear the announcement. Then he goes and plays 24 minutes for the Vegas Golden Knights. But do you think, I guess first, do you think this could be a trend we're going to see here, as we haven't had any like legitimate injuries outside of the goaltending with Jacob Markstrom, but do you think we'll see a few more players follow Pietrangelo's lead here?
I don't think so. Not unless they're seriously injured. I think guys were so excited and amped up to play in this. I think Pietrangelo is coming at this from a little bit of a different view. I think what's only tough to figure is he announces that he's bailing out. Then he plays 24 minutes last night. You're thinking, okay, well, how injured is he if he's playing 24 minutes a night, still 2 weeks ahead of the tournament? But he's also a guy that's already won a gold medal for Team Canada. He's played at the highest levels. He's won 2 Stanley Cups. He's got a family. He's got 3 or 4 kids. Like it's 2 weeks that you're asking him to be away. And I think maybe that part weighs on him. That's just my guess, in addition to how much better your body's going to feel when taking that time off. So that's part of it. And we also don't know, like, could be sick. I have no idea. Like, it said ailment. Doesn't mean that it's necessarily of the, hey, I've got a sore ankle variety. I've been sick for 6 days now. I feel like death. So who knows? Maybe he's dealing with something else. That said, I think a lot of people were curious, is this like the All-Star weekend? If you decide to not show up and you're obviously capable, do you get suspended? I checked in with the NHL this morning, and the answer to that is no. Players were free to make their own choice here. Obviously, because of the length of commitment, it is a bigger deal that they're asking these players to take on. So no punishment coming in that form from the NHL for Pietrangelo. But just talking to some teammates and former teammates, they just kind of felt like this is something that he would do, something a little bit on brand for him as well. So it's a huge honor to play for Team Canada. There's a long list of players that would, give their right arm to jump into that tournament on that roster. Now it's going to be who's going to get the lucky call.
Yeah, and we have our poll question up now, so we'll get to the results from that in a little bit here. But just Frank, quickly before we get to Jesse Montano, who would you pick as your guy?
Yeah, I would probably go with Josh Morrissey.
Yeah, I think that would be fair. This was one of our projected lineups, but sorry, yeah, we had
These were the cuts. Yeah. Yeah, I'd probably go with Josh Morrissey. I think he's just played really well from start to finish this year. And look, I understand the push for Drew Doughty, but he just hasn't played in so long. And I know how good he is. And I know right shot and making a swap like that would be pretty interesting. But he's still a handful of games away from returning this season. To throw him right into the deep end of the pool is a lot to ask.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. All right, let's move along, get to our big segment for the day. It's brought to you by Charm Diamond Centers. They are proudly Canadian owned and operated since 1972, and you can get a custom ring built and delivered in less than 4 weeks with the Charm Masterpiece program. Find out more by visiting them online at charmdiamondcenters.com. Always a pleasure to welcome Jesse Montano from Gorilla Sports into the show. And Jesse, where you're joining us from, it's shiny, it's bright, the sun's beaming in the Colorado Avalanche room last night. It was a little gloomy. I wanted to start there. Do you think that there's any aspect of the chemistry side of this that could really bite the Avs in the behind when you look at this deal?
Yeah, hey, I'm out here in New York, so I apologize. I'm not in my normal studio, but happy to be here chatting with you guys. This has been a really, crazy 72 hours for the Avalanche and their fan base. And the part that really struck me is something you guys were talking about just a minute ago. With Nathan MacKinnon seemed genuinely caught off guard by this when we talked to him a couple nights ago in Boston. Then he kind of reiterated that last night after they were able to knock off the Rangers at Madison Square Garden. The room seemed genuinely shocked. This was something that when it first went down, conversations I was having with folks, we were saying, well, Nate had to have known about this. They had to have run it by him. It does not seem like that's the case. I know he's heavily consulted on a lot of moves that the team makes, but it doesn't seem like this, or at least, the actual transaction of the deal does not seem like something that he was aware of. Jared Bednar, the same way. He was down in a way that we don't typically see him. I think this was shocking as shocking for the locker room as it was the fan base. And Nathan MacKinnon made the comment to me last night after they won in thrilling fashion, a great play with from Cale Makar with 14 seconds left to win last night. Nathan MacKinnon said, we needed this. We needed to get this win out of the way to start to feel good and just kind of turn that page. So I think it was shocking. But that win last night, the fact that they've played well in these couple games since the trade, I think helps. But I think this is something that they'll be reeling from for a little bit here.
Yeah, no doubt, Jesse. And, it's interesting to hear Chris McFarland give some thoughts. Obviously, this team is now trying to get deeper, a little bit cheaper as well. But when you look at the flexibility that they have moving forward, if you had one area that you were going to circle that you believe the Avs will make a move to fix or fill between now and March 7th, what would it be?
It's a top 4 defenseman, no doubt about it. They need to get better on D. Look, I agreed with Chris McFarland's assessment that this team isn't deep enough, right? Nathan MacKinnon made a comment to us a couple years ago after they won the Cup, and he said, look, every year you want to convince yourself, you want to think you got the team. But after you go through it and after you win it, it's easy to assess when you do and when you don't. I agree with the assessment. They weren't deep enough to win a Stanley Cup this year, and that's their goal. So I understand that thought process. So I think this move, adding Jack Drury helps. When you get Val Nichushkin back, yeah, maybe you could make the argument that technically up front you're a little bit deeper. But they need to use some of this extra cap flexibility to bolster that top 4 defense that they've got. Josh Manson has really struggled this year. He injured his hand earlier in the season, and to me, it looks like it's still really hampering him. And they've just got a rotating cast on that bottom pair. They aren't able to keep pucks out of their net the way they'd like, or at least they're not able to limit chances the way they'd like. Mackenzie Blackwood coming in has probably had to stand on his head a few too many times for his liking or for Jared Bednar's liking since they got here. I think they need another impactful defenseman there on the back end. And then with the flexibility, if they could find a way to sneak in another top 9 forward, I know they'd really like that. But for my money right now, they got to bolster the top half of this decor.
So we were just talking at the beginning of the show about the idea of absolutes and, hey, we're not paying you more than Nathan MacKinnon. In the end, given what you know about Mikko Rantanen, how he's played, what he meant to that team, and really what the future of the league's cap situation looks like, 3 years from now, we're talking about $110 million cap. Right move or wrong move to draw a hard line in the sand?
Frank, I was listening. I'm with you. I'm withholding my real judgment on this deal until 5 weeks from now, because the way that I'm looking at it right now, this is nowhere near enough for what you just gave up, for what you got back. It's nowhere near enough, and the team is not better than they were, this time last week. So I want to see what they do next. If Chris McFarland can fill in this roster in a meaningful way and really provide some depth and fix this defense, then maybe you say, okay, that was the right move. You didn't want to cap strap yourself. But I really do struggle with the notion of setting that internal cap of not wanting to pay more than Nathan MacKinnon. Anybody that knows Nathan MacKinnon, he is the last guy in the league that is worried about if I have a teammate making more than me or not. I all along felt like this was a deal that was going to get done, because at the end of the day, they were ultimately going to decide, a player of this caliber, you pay him the money you want. I've got on pretty good authority. I knew in the summer that this deal was pretty close to getting done right before the Draisaitl deal got signed, and I think that definitely changed a lot of things. But, for me, I would have just, if it was me, I would have figured out the right number, and I would have paid Mikko Rantanen to keep him here. So, again, we'll see what they do with the extra flexibility, and maybe they spin this into a net positive. But for me, right now on, January 26th, 27th, not enough, not the right move. But like I said, let's wait and see. Let's talk again after March 7th,
Yeah, and that's where I was going to go next. Is understandably, obviously, a lot of talk about what the Avs gave up here. You got your first look at Marty Necas in an Avalanche sweater. I wanted to ask you how you think he fit in, and if you think he's the archetype and type of player who could maybe fit in well in this Avs top six.
So here is the one thing being left out in a lot of this conversation, understandably so. Marty Necas is a fantastic player. He's very good, and it was really fun to watch him last night playing with Nathan MacKinnon, Cale Makar. I mean, he's buzzing around. He's got great speed, great hands, good creativity. Just kind of keeping an eye on him in warm-ups, and fun player to watch. Here's the other part of this. This is also, I was talking with someone yesterday. This is a little bit of a bet on Nathan MacKinnon. This is a bet on, do we think that Nathan MacKinnon can elevate Marty Necas to the level that maybe he doesn't, one for one replicate Mikko Rantanen. Maybe he's not a 55 goal scorer, but man, if we can turn this guy into a consistent 90 point, maybe touches 100-point guy, then, hey, we think Nathan MacKinnon can elevate him to that, and we think we can use that cap savings to fill in. But I've really liked what I've seen from Marty Necas through the first two games. Seems like a good guy in the locker room, but I think this trade was shocking for him as well. So I'm anxious to see how he settles in here. I think he does, our archetype well to fit with this team. Plays with speed, good details in his game. I think Jared Bednar is going to like him, and I think Jack Drury is a Jared Bednar type guy to a T. Gives him a guy to take some face-off. So early returns, I think 4 points, 5 points between the two of them last night. Early returns, they've been good, but again, it's hard when you're comparing it right next to a 55-goal, 100-point Mikko Rantanen.
An interesting bet that the Avs had made. Jesse, really appreciate your time. I know you're on the road covering a blockbuster deal, but you found time for us, and I appreciate it. Thanks, man.
Always got time for you, boys. Good to see you.
Full question and Ask DFO brought to you by our friends at Dominion Lending Centers. Mortgage up for renewal. Lock in the best rates and products with Dominion Lending Centers. Visit them online, dominionlending.ca. We threw the poll question out over on Twitter. Mackenzie Weegar was the leading vote at 36%. Drew Doughty in second at 31%. I'll make my case for Drew Doughty, and this is the same thing that I made with the goaltending and who should be the third goalie. Should it be Marc-Andre Fleury? 4-game tournament. I don't even know if you'll need your seventh defenseman at any point. I would be going with Drew Doughty purely based on the experience, and I think the general good vibes he'd bring to a room. I think to win this tournament, you're going to need to come together quick, have a high sense of camaraderie to really up that competition level and kind of get the juices flowing and get everyone bought in. Frank, I think Drew Doughty can do that.
Yeah, I just want to see him first. I want to see him play games and make an impact, step right back into the NHL and be that upper echelon player. You don't have 2 weeks to figure it out. That's the problem.
Let's get to an Ask DFO from the YouTube. A couple sort of like along similar lines. You had Randy saying, what do the Capitals do in response? Is this going to be an arms race? Jay wants to know, does this Rantanen trade spark any sort of other big moves? He throws out Pettersson. I think you could go Miller or a few other names. Where do you think the next big move maybe comes from here? What style of move, I guess?
I think one of the biggest losers in this deal on Friday was the Vancouver Canucks, because the Hurricanes had really put in a lot of time and thought process toward acquiring both, not together, but separately, Elias Pettersson and JT Miller from the Canucks, and taking that team off the table that had so many different things that could have worked for you if you were Vancouver. That they were aggressive. They were hungry to bring in a difference maker. Now that's one fewer team. And that part it kind of puts the Canucks back at the drawing board today.
Yeah, an interesting situation there in Vancouver. Let's get to our bets for Bet365. Download the app today. Use the promo code NATION. Whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. How about another piece of news? Connor McDavid is back from his suspension tonight for the Edmonton Oilers. And is it not just the most predictable storyline ever that McDavid comes back off the suspension and goes supernova? Also, this matchup tonight for the Oilers, they dominate the Seattle Kraken. 9 wins in their last 10 games. It's in Edmonton. The Oilers got a win on Saturday, so they're back in the W column. McDavid, 2 points. Oilers puck line, plus 165. That is a good enough price tag for me to jump on the Oil tonight. And we wrap up the show, Frank, as we always do, with a little bit of garbage time. And as you know, I'm dealing with the heartbreak from my football team. You have the elation of yours going to the Super Bowl. And to tie it into hockey, a heartwarming little tribute from the Gaudreau family with their 2 Eagles fans watching from above. I know Meredith shared the video too of Johnny with the Coors Light and his Eagles gear on. So again, I'm sad about my Bills, but I did get a little a little teary-eyed reading and looking at all the tributes of the Gaudreau family.
Yeah, and just huge Philly sports fans in general. So, yeah, definitely thinking of the Gaudreau boys. Think of them all the time. But on a day like yesterday, for sure, going to the Super Bowl, 100%.
Yeah, it was, again, some really nice tributes. And that is who I will be rooting for in the Super Bowl. Not just for you, Frank, but I guess for the Gaudreau family as well. You talked earlier about your illness. You are still grinding, but I'm not letting you pull a Pietrangelo and bow out of the Four Nations. I want to hang out with you in Montreal. I'm
in on that. I just got to get there first. I'd like to just get to tomorrow, quite honestly. That's how poorly I feel right now.
All right, you rest up, Frank. That is a wrap on today's edition of the show. Shout out to our producer, Pat Puff, Jesse Montano from Gorilla Sports as well. Everybody in the YouTube, you were great. Enjoy the hockey tonight. And as always, we'll be back tomorrow at noon Eastern. What's up, hockey fans? If you enjoyed that video, then you're going to want to hit the subscribe button to not miss any of our content. From daily live shows with Frank Saravalli to analysis from former NHLers to exclusive interviews with some of the biggest names in the hockey world on Frankly Speaking. You're going to want to hit that subscribe button and stay up to date with everything going on in the hockey world.